Member John Petrusak.
Morning, everyone. It's an honor to stand before you today as we gather to address one of the most critical issues of our time, housing equity. We are fortunate to have with us a distinguished speaker who's profoundly impacted our understanding of urban development, social justice, educational equity, and structural inequities. Dr. Andre Perry is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, a prolific author, and an unwavering advocate for marginalized communities like the majority communities of color in my organization's service area in the South Chicago region and countless other metropolitan regions throughout the country. Dr. Perry's research and writings have shed light on the persistent inequities that shape our cities and towns, and he has been a powerful voice in calling for policies that foster inclusivity and justice. His groundbreaking book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Properties in America's Black Cities, challenges us to rethink how we value communities and addresses the systemic devaluation of assets in Black neighborhoods. He co-authored the groundbreaking Brookings Institute report influencing the Biden administration's use of the report's recommendations to establish the PAVE Intergovernmental Task Force. We thank Dr. Perry for his partnerships with NFHA and its member organizations across the country in appearing to speak out about institutional racial bias in the real estate appraisal industry. In addition to his academic achievements, Dr. Perry is frequently a commentator on major news outlets where he shares his insights on the intersections of race, housing, and economic development. His work is not just about identifying problems, but offering solutions that can lead us toward a more equitable and inclusive future. Today, Dr. Perry will bring his wealth of knowledge and passion to our conference, guiding us through the complexities of housing equity and inspiring us to take bold actions for change. Join me in welcoming Dr. Andre Perry.
Hello, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here in NFHA. Lisa and Nikitra Bailey are good friends of mine, advocates, and I have to say most of my success is predicated on the work that you've done throughout the country. When we released that 2018 report on housing devaluation, it was people like you that reached out and disseminated the information, reached out to reporters, and it just took off like wildfire. And I always say that was just one domino that needed to fall. There are others that will fall, and we will get to that. Now, I had an advisor a long time ago tell me, whatever you do, never lead a discussion with a scatter plot. Here's a scatter plot, right? And I wanted to share this partly because of the conversation you just heard. I went in the back and said, hey, let me switch up some things to put this here. One of the pernicious effects of white supremacy is convincing people that this is a racial zero-sum game we're playing. That investments in one group takes away from another. But I wanted to show you some data here. This is a scatter plot looking at the correlation between Black well-being and white well-being. Now, on that x-axis, that horizontal row, that's Black well-being in cities. All those circles are cities all across the country. On the y-axis, or that vertical row, that's white well-being across cities across the country. Now, you don't have to necessarily be a statistician, an economist, a sociologist to understand this, but that upward slope means that they are positively correlated. Meaning, as we solve for Black well-being, white well-being improves. When well-being generally entails the economic, social, and political factors that are involved in the question, how are you doing? So when you ask, how are you doing, it involves those things. So as we invest in black well-being, white well-being improves. When we invest in brown well-being, black well-being improves. In fact, whenever we invest in any low wealth group, I don't care if you're rural, white, Hispanic, whatever, when we invest in people that need the investment, particularly those who've been denied opportunities to build wealth, what's the saying? Rising tide lifts all ships, right? This is the empirical evidence for that. So I wanted to start there just because we need to break the narrative that we're in competition. We need to understand that this is not a zero-sum game, that our fates are inextricably linked. So that was my introduction with the scatter plot. But what I do at Brookings, I measure the assets in black majority cities and neighborhoods all across the country. Here's a map of all the black majority cities. Obviously, there's too many black majority neighborhoods to put on a map, but here's the black majority cities, places where the share of the black population is 50% or higher. Now, the number one asset that most people know about is housing. And, let me see that. Oops, sorry. Okay. And housing is important to wealth, largely because of it. You can get equity in the home, you can pass it on, so on and so forth. So it's a major contributor to wealth, the most common way to build wealth. And as you can see here on this chart, this is median wealth across the racial groups. Black folk have about $45,000 in wealth. Hispanics have about $62,000. White, $285,000, and that dreaded other Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander. I hate that category. That we need to break those out, but because of data limitations, we combine them, about $536,000. So you can see the distribution. Now, I want to share this, because this is a myth that we don't understand. Actually, black wealth, brown wealth, Asian wealth is growing across the country. You can look, since we've been recording this since 1989, it's been increasing over time. And you can look, if you look very carefully, it increased during the pandemic. So black wealth is actually increasing. Now, but why we need to pay attention to historic discrimination, let me show you, or layer on white wealth. So black wealth, brown wealth, Asian wealth is growing, but so is the wealth gap. Let me back that up so you can see. So all those resources that were gained through redlining, blockbusting, single-family zoning ordinances, all those different policies that occurred that prohibited black, brown wealth, it's reflected in here. Because let me show you this. This is a chart that shows how wealth is distributed by asset class, by race. So you can see on that x-axis the white, black, Hispanic, and other, and you can see the percent increase. So when you look at the orange bars, that represents housing equity. And you can see for black and brown people, it's the largest share of growth. And so why we saw black and brown wealth increase over the last few years is because home prices are growing higher and higher, right? And we do know that although the housing rate of home ownership has increased slightly, this is really driven by just the value of homes are just increasing over time. But you can see that it's bigger in the orange areas for black and brown folk than other races. White and Asian wealth is largely driven by the stock market. And so the returns from the stock market has been greater, particularly over the last decade or so, than housing growth. And you can see it here clearly in this chart. On those bottom lines, those orange and yellow lines, that's real estate and corporate equity, so stock equity for black folk, and then and the corollary lines for white folks. Now, because black people are less engaged in the stock market, you see that low growth. But you see housing equity and stock equity really rising for white Americans at a phenomenal rate. And that is largely because when you have more discretionary resources, you can invest more in the stock market. You can invest more in housing. So that's why we see those differences. But I just wanted to be clear about this, that when we talk about black people, we should not be talking about disparity. We should be talking about growth. And in almost every major category, in education, in housing, in business ownership has actually increased by 14% in terms of employer firms over the last few years. In every category, black people are actually thriving in many places. Brown people are actually thriving. When we frame things in disparity, we don't see the growth that is occurring at a local level. So one of my goals, and it is clear, is to spotlight the strength, to spotlight places where things are improving. The reason why is we don't necessarily invest in problems. We only invest in strength. When you only look at disparity, when you only look at black and white framing and putting everything in the aggregate, you don't see where black people are actually improving in life outcomes. And that's where it's going to lead me to my next goal. Now, most of you know me through that work on housing devaluation, and this is a chart showing that home values across place and race, or this is in areas where the share of the black population, you see that on that x-axis or that horizontal row, and the value of homes on that y-axis. You see that as well. So as the share of the black population increases, the home values go down. Homes in areas where the black population is less than percent, on average, this is 2018 data, it's a little different now, a little higher now. Homes in largely white neighborhoods, about 340,000. They're about half as much in areas of 50% or higher. As you know, we measured, we controlled for absolute price, structural characteristics, neighborhood amenities, and what we found is that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by $48,000 per home, about 23%. Cumulatively, they're about $156 billion. Oop, it keeps forwarding. $156 billion in lost equity all across the country. You can see here on this chart, this is a chart showing wherever there's home value differences. The magenta circles mean that there's lower value. The green circles mean that there are higher values in black communities. In Memphis, Tennessee, for instance, about a 22% difference, about $25,000 per home. And just to show the range of this, in Lynchburg, Virginia, for instance, if you helicoptered a home in a black neighborhood and put it in a white neighborhood with similar social circumstances, so similar educational levels, similar crime rates, it would increase in value by 81%. Rochester, New York, 65%. Jacksonville, Florida, 47% difference. Detroit, 37%. Now, I always point out there are places where the homes in black neighborhoods are actually priced higher. Nashville, for instance, is about 10% positive. Wichita Falls, 16% different. Boston, Massachusetts, 23%. I always got to remind people that Boston is no less racist than Lynchburg, but the home prices are higher. But I always put this in perspective. What's 156 billion? It would have financed more than 4 million black-owned businesses based upon the average amount black people use to start their firms, replace the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over, paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees, covered nearly all of Hurricane Katrina damage, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It's a big number. Now, we also did a study that looked at the impact of housing on overall longevity or well-being. Now, these are the 13 most impactful predictors of life expectancy by county area. Housing, home ownership, now I shouldn't say housing, home ownership is the third most impactful for black people on life expectancy. It adds for every standard deviation, I won't get into that, it adds almost half a year of life expectancy, which is a big thing. So in places like Montgomery County, Prince George's County, where home ownership is generally higher, people live to 80. In places like Selma, Alabama, not to point them out, people live to 67. And you see the difference in home ownership rates in all of these places. No question, when you have homes, when you own a home, when you have equity, you can invest in education. You can invest in starting a business. You can invest, I always bring these things up now, you can invest in vitro fertilization. You can run for mayors in your local office. That equity drives growth in so many other areas, and it shows up in life expectancy. So for me, this is not just about wealth and saying you own a home. This is about improving life itself. That many of the health issues that we suffer from are related to insecure housing. Right? So this is a priority, and I'm going to get into our interconnectedness once again to explain why this is important, but I want to get into well-being this very quickly. Now, well-being, as I said, can be understood as how people feel and function about themselves. It involves the social, political, economic factors, housing being a big factor in economic security of well-being, and so I'm going to just show you some data on this. Now, this is a chart on that x-axis, follow me here. That's the wealth quintile. So as you go from left to right, you see the lowest wealth quintile, and the right side, you get the top wealth quintile. On that blue bar, that represents thriving. On that orange ball, that represents the lowest forms of well-being, struggling or suffering. Now, as you can see, as wealth increases, thriving increases. So as wealth increases, thriving increases. The data is absolutely clear across every racial group, across every population. This holds true. Now, well-being is also highly correlated with subjective indicators of neighborhood quality. So on that blue bar, that represents neighborhood quality. We do a lot of surveying on how people perceive their neighborhood, and neighborhood security. We also do that research. And as home ownership, housing is a major factor in the perception of neighborhoods, as the thriving index improves, you see around those dimensions, we get more thriving overall. Now, I just want to go back to this to sort of tie these all together. If we're going to address a lot of these issues, it means we have to invest in people who have lower wealth. And it's not going to hurt people with high wealth. It actually improves their standing. So in our conversations about special purpose credit programs, about first-time home buyer initiatives, and the like. These are issues that are should be universally accepted as goods. Now, I work at the Brookings Institution. We take a nonpartisan approach to this, but I say this all the time. It should be very clear who you vote for in this crowd when it comes to who's going to support the programs, the policy, and I should say policies, that are going to invest in low wealth individuals, people who've been discriminated against, and people who just have lower wealth overall. It should be very clear. That's who you should vote for. That's who we should rally behind. And it actually should be a unifying issue, that as we invest in low wealth populations, everyone improves. Everyone improves. Now, how do we invest? I bring this up all the time. You got to invest in people first and places. Now, I'll jump to the second bullet real quick. When you invest only in place, in brick and mortar, in infrastructure, what generally happens is value of property, value of infrastructure increases, and people can't keep pace, and they are pushed out. So eventually you got to cut the check. You got to cut the check to people. You got to cut the check to homeowners. You got to cut the check to renters. You got to cut the check to business owners, because the goal is to increase their income so they can benefit from and take part in the development. Everyone deserves development. And there is no way around this home ownership thing. We eventually need a housing policy that is focused on creating new homeowners. I'm moving beyond LIHTC, no shade on LIHTC programs, but eventually we need to increase home ownership by increasing inventory. There is no way around it. And that means investing in people. Now, we do have to invest in place. That's clear. Because of historic devaluation in many different areas, you see the lack of resources in place. So you do need to make strategic investments in these areas that shows devaluation. Now, and finally, we have to divest from racism. And what do I mean? And this is where I think NFHA has been absolutely instrumental, particularly on the appraisal side, because I think I'm generally a friend of HUD and of the administration. They've done remarkable things across the last 4 years. In particular, they launched the PAVE initiative, as you probably know, the Property Appraisal Valuation Equity Task Force, which is a tremendous accomplishment. We need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep the pressure on. Administrations change. The work has to be done, right? We have to divest from these systems, because if we diversify all the appraisers and they're still using the price comparison model, you're going to get similar results, right? Because it's never been, it has been about people. Let me tell you, some of the emails I got from appraisers over the last couple of years are absolutely bonkers. And I don't like sharing them, but one of these days I will. You're right. No, I'm trying to unify right now. I'm not trying to be negative. But we have to dismantle this architecture of inequality. It's the architecture of inequality. It's the things that happen without anyone wearing a white hood, without anyone carrying a tiki torch. There are systems in place we must dismantle. This is what NFHA is about, dismantling that infrastructure, and we got to keep the pressure on. You got to force governments to do this work at the federal, state, and local level. And so I always say, hey, I'm a friend of everyone until they're not, right? You got to keep the pressure on. Now, I wanted to share this initiative, Valuing Homes in Black Communities. We're partnering with our economic architecture, and it should interest some of you in this room. We need a new generation of innovators at the market and policy levels. We need new mortgage products. We need new policies across the board, right? You can clap that up. And we need solutions that come from the people who are proximate to the problem, right? That, I think I'm handsome, I think I wear nice suits, smart, and all these things. The answer should not come from me, right? They should come from the people who are Now, I do live in Prince George's County. Homes are devalued there. I just want to be clear about that. But there are people on the ground who are doing this work, and they need the incentives to continue to do the work. If we continue to just reward the muckety-mucks who are truly invested in status quo, we're not going to see change. So we partner with economic architecture, and we received generous funding from the CZI, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, JP Morgan Chase, and Progressive, to offer up to $1 million of incentives to individuals across the country who are working on housing devaluation. So, and it doesn't have to be around appraisals. It can be because I'm always clear about this. Home value differences are not just about appraising, although represents about 20% of the value difference, which is significant. There are other areas that we need to inspect. We need to inspect underwriting. We need to inspect real estate agent behavior. We need to inspect single-family zoning ordinances. We need to get at tax assessments. All these other things determine the value of the home. And so we are opening up this application in the fall. If you are interested, we had a first go at this about 1.5 years ago. It was wildly successful. We had a lot of innovators who actually got picked up in terms of their businesses, either by Freddie and Fannie and others who are doing good work in communities. But we just opened this up. We're going to open this up in fall. So if you are an innovator around market-based approaches, and it will require market-based solutions and policy solutions, if you're interested, please apply. Now, I want to just end with a little bit of why I named my book Know Your Price, because I always end with this because it is important for me to reiterate why I want to talk to you. The book Know Your Price comes from my favorite play in the whole wide world, Two Trains Running. If you don't know August Wilson, he's arguably the greatest American playwright. Right, you can clap that up. And he's from my hometown, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My good friend Andre is here. We went to high school together. It's always good to see my brother from Peabody. But in the play Two Train Running, there's the main character, Memphis. And he is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh. And Memphis goes, I'm not selling my property for, they offer him $15,000. And he said, I'm not selling my property for $15,000. I got my price. I know my price. I'm paraphrasing, but it's a refrain throughout the play. I got my price. I know my price. I know my deed. And throughout the play, he says this. There's another character, Hambone, who makes a deal with a proprietor. He agrees to paint a fence in exchange for a ham. His name is Hambone, right? So he paints the fence, but the proprietor never gives him a ham. And throughout the play, he goes, give me my ham, give me my ham, right? Now, we don't know if he had mental illness or not, but eventually, he dies demanding his ham, and he's going crazy, right? Now, The moral of the story, there's a happy ending to the story. I don't want to end with that. Memphis gets $35,000, and we assume he's getting the white rate or the market rate, whatever you choose. Now, so the moral of the story is you got to know you have worth. You got to demand your worth. What I try to do is give people the price to stand on. But there's another moral to the story. It's around ham bone. Now, the moral of that story is, hey, we're doing this work. If you're doing this work alone on an island, you'll go crazy. It is really sanity-sapping work. You have to work together. The reason why we come here is not just to learn, and it's not for me to wax poetic on some issues. It's really to rally the troops around giving people their worth, what they're worth, right? You can clap now. The whole housing devaluation is somewhat a misnomer. It's not homes that are devalued, it's people that are devalued, right? So please, go leave this place, work together, re-energize yourself, because we need you in this fight. Thank you for allowing me to present. Thank Lisa for all her tireless work, and thank you for allowing me, and join the collaborative challenge.